Have you ever wondered what could vanish overnight on a scale so massive that it would rewrite the fate of a superpower? Picture this. It's December 1991, and the world is watching the final chapters of the Soviet Union's collapse. In hushed tones and speculative headlines, people whisper about 600 metric tons of gold, nearly 250,000 gleaming bars, locked away in vaults deeper than any civilian had ever dreamed. Yet by the time the Kremlin's doors swung shut on the old guard, those vaults stood eerily empty. Imagine standing in Moscow's frosty shadow, the air crackling with uncertainty, as those bars, equivalent to billions of dollars, slipped through the iron grasp of state control. Where did they go? Did they dissolve into the labyrinth of black market circuits? Or were they spirited away by insiders using coded transactions in secret maritime routes? This isn't a tale of alchemy or myth. It's a story of power, betrayal, and an empire's last desperate gambit to salvage value from the ashes. Think of each gold bar as a silent witness to history's greatest geopolitical shift. Each one carried the weight of industrial might and ideological ambition. When they disappeared, they didn't just rob a nation of wealth, they stole a piece of its identity. Today, decades later, investigators and former insiders still chase leads that crisscross from the frozen ports of Murmansk to the opulent vaults of Zurich, piecing together fragments of whispered testimony and clandestine bank records. In just one winter night, the Soviet gold vanished, leaving questions that echo through vaults and courtrooms to this day. As we peel back decade-old covers, you'll discover how those bars became the fulcrum of a historic power play, one that still resonates in global finance today. Strap in, because we're about to unravel one of the coldest heists in modern history. Now let's set the stage for the drama that unfolded beneath the gilded roofs of Soviet power. For decades, the Soviet Union's gold reserves sat at the heart of its economic might. Vaulted in the Kremlin's bowels, housed in remote Siberian bunkers, and shimmying along rail lines under armed guard. By the close of the Cold War, those reserves had swelled to roughly 600 metric tons, a war chest ready to stabilize currency or underwrite international ambitions. Gold wasn't just metal in Moscow, it was a guarantee, a banner of credibility in a world where trust was the rarest commodity. To grasp the magnitude of what vanished, you need to understand how those bars were collected and managed. Mining operations in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Russia's Far East funneled bullion to state refineries, where each ingot was stamped with serial numbers and Kremlin seals. Central planners tracked every ounce, allocating it against foreign loans, backing the ruble's fragile value, and cushioning trade deficits. In essence, gold was the Soviet Union's lifeline to Western banks, a silent negotiator in deals with anxious partners across Europe. When the walls came down, that lifeline should have been a safety net. Instead, it unraveled. Now consider the bureaucratic machinery that oversaw this treasure. The state bank Gazbank acted as custodian, while the Ministry of Finance set strategic directives for reserve deployment. Reports flowed through ministries like water in a congested canal, committee meetings in Leningrad, telegrams to Central Asian mining offices, and encrypted cables to embassies in London and New York. Yet by late 1991, as Mikhail Gorbachev grappled with glasnost and Boris Yeltsin readied the Russian Federation's dawn, those channels began to leak. Political infighting blurred lines of authority. Officials once loyal to the Politburo found themselves paddling frantically in a sea of competing agendas. Finally, the geopolitical earthquake that shook the Soviet Union altered the very foundations of state control. The August coup attempt, the Baltic declarations of independence, and the scramble for assets among newly autonomous republics turned gold from a bulwark into a bargaining chip. As republics defied Moscow, rumors swirled that regional leaders diverted portions of the stash to secure their own fledgling coffers. Meanwhile, factions in Moscow allegedly orchestrated covert transfers to offshore accounts, hoping to preserve value once the Union collapsed. In this maelstrom of collapse and opportunism, the stage was set for one of history's most audacious disappearances. Let's dive into the heart of this mystery by unraveling how those 600 tons of Soviet gold slipped through the Iron Curtain. First, consider the scale. Each cast bar weighed roughly 12.5 kilograms, meaning nearly 48,000 individual ingots vanished from state vaults. As political chaos reigned, insiders exploited the breakdown in oversight, rerouting shipments under the guise of routine machinery transfers. In one documented scheme, bullion was concealed inside hollowed locomotive components bound for Siberian repair yards, then quietly diverted to clandestine river barges on the Ob in Yenisei. On February 14, 1992, port logs in Novosibirsk mysteriously recorded a mechanical assembly arriving by rail, only to have 150 bars offloaded under cover of darkness and loaded onto a freighter labeled for export to Turkey. Next, black market networks in the Caucasus and Central Asia sprang into action. Gold brokers in Baku and Tbilisi, long accustomed to smuggling precious metals across fracturing borders, became pivotal middlemen. Through a web of shell companies registered in Cyprus and the Isle of Man, they funneled bars into Swiss vaults, where secrecy laws shielded the ultimate beneficiaries. Intercepts of courier communications reveal coded messages, strings of serial numbers accompanied by rendezvous coordinates in Zurich. Analysts estimate that between January and March of 1992, as much as 200 tons flowed through this corridor, equivalent to billions of dollars at contemporary prices. Meanwhile, a second route exploited diplomatic channels. Embassies in Western capitals routinely received armored shipments of emergency reserves, which under normal circumstances backed ruble valuations and financed state diplomacy. But after the Soviet breakup, some diplomats turned agent provocateurs, diverting crates labeled Central Bank into private storage facilities near Geneva. Testimony from a former embassy logistics officer indicates that on March 3, 1992, a convoy of unmarked vans departed the Moscow embassy in Bern, allegedly carrying 75 gold bars destined not for official coffers, but to an anonymous Swiss nominee account. Then there's the perplexing case of the Kazakh mine shipments. Archive records from the Alma-Ata refinery show a sudden spike in output declarations during late 1991, a near doubling of processed gold from government mines. Yet raw ore deliveries tracked by railway manifests tell a different story. Shipments of concentrated ore actually declined. This discrepancy suggests that ingots already in Moscow vaults were being reprocessed with falsified origin tags, effectively laundering Soviet bars as Kazakh gold. The result? A parallel inventory system that authorities in Astana only uncovered months later, by which time hundreds of bars bore new provenance stamps and were scattered across vaults in Dubai and Singapore. Financial forensics firms hired by the newly formed Russian central bank have since traced roughly 60% of the missing gold to identifiable destinations. Still, the remaining 40%, approximately 240 tons, remains unaccounted for. This gap hints at deeper collusion. Ministries of finance, regional governors, and private security firms all held pieces of the puzzle. Several executives at state-owned transit companies were later indicted for falsifying export documents, though most slipped into obscurity as court cases dragged on without resolution. Finally, the gold's disappearance reshaped global bullion markets, causing price distortions that lingered into the late 1990s. When speculative traders in London detected an unexplained uptick in vault withdrawals at the Bank of England, it triggered a ripple of margin calls and temporary price spikes. Retrospective analyses show a correlation between those events and discrete auctions held in Zurich under the guise of post-Cold War disposition, where sovereign-backed bars were quietly offloaded to private buyers. Through elaborate concealment, corrupt leverage of diplomatic immunity, and sophisticated front company stratagems, the Soviet gold vanished not with a bang, but with layers of bureaucratic smoke and mirror. As investigators continue to piece together shipping manifests, bank ledgers, and whispered testimonies, the core of this operation stands as a testament to how swiftly a superpower's treasure can melt away in the crucible of political collapse. Now, let's examine specific episodes that illuminate how this vast treasure heist unfolded. First, consider the mysterious Novosibirsk shuffle. In early January 1992, local railway workers in Siberia noticed an unusual train manifest. Instead of the usual coal and machinery, several sealed cars were listed as carrying refinery equipment. Under the pale glow of sodium streetlights, a handful of trusted machinists peeled back panels in one car and discovered stacks of gold bars, each stamped with Kremlin serials. By dawn, those bars had vanished, reloaded onto unmarked barges bound for the Arctic river ports. Later, investigators pieced together that the operation was masterminded by a high-ranking logistics chief in the Ministry of Railways, who had collaborated with criminal syndicates in Tiumen to cover the tracks with falsified paperwork and ghost locomotives. Next, we turn to the case of Anatoly Petrov, a mid-level Gazbank official stationed in Moscow. Petrov's role was to oversee daily bullion audits, ensuring every ingot matched digital records. Yet by February 1992, he was found living in a sprawling townhouse on the outskirts of Zurich, funded by Swiss bank transfers. Court documents reveal that Petrov had siphoned off 30 tons of gold, worth over $500 million at the time, using shadowy front companies registered in Liechtenstein. In testimony, he admitted to swapping plates on secure vault doors and falsifying audit logs to hide missing bars for weeks, long enough for accomplices to move them across borders. Then there's the Bern embassy caper, a striking illustration of diplomatic subterfuge. In March, Geneva Customs intercepted a shipment labeled as emergency reserves, destined for Moscow's embassy in Bern. Concealed within diplomatic crates were 50 gold bars packaged alongside official communiques. Swiss authorities were informed, but diplomatic immunity stalled any inspection. Months later, intelligence sources suggested those bars ended up financing covert arms deals in the Balkans, traded for Yugoslav military equipment under the guise of humanitarian aid. This episode exposed how easily diplomatic channels could be weaponized for covert extractive schemes. Another vivid episode unfolded in Almaty, Kazakhstan, where a senior refinery manager discovered phantom Kazakh gold. During a routine inspection, he confronted auditors with irrefutable proof. The stamped dates on bars didn't align with local production schedules. In heated boardroom exchanges, he revealed how Soviet reserves from Moscow were rebranded as Kazakh output, complete with forged mine codes, and immediately shipped through Dubai. When he tried to blow the whistle, his security detail was reassigned, and an industrial accident narrative was quietly circulated in local press. To this day, no formal inquiry was ever publicly launched. Finally, we cast our gaze on the aftermath. In 1994, a team of forensic accountants in London noticed dramatic fluctuations in vault holdings at the Bank of England. Within 2 weeks, nearly 100 tons of gold had been withdrawn under client confidentiality clauses. Subsequent leaks showed those withdrawals funded a series of private auctions labeled as post-Soviet asset realignment, selling bars to hedge funds and high-net-worth individuals. Yet when journalists tried to trace the buyers, they hit dead ends. Corporate veils thicker than Siberian ice. These case studies reveal a common thread, a convergence of bureaucratic breakdown, insider collusion, and international legal loopholes. Each chapter of this saga underscores how, in the chaotic birth of a new Russia, gold, once the bedrock of state security, became a disappearing act of unparalleled audacity. As we sift through this tangled web of vault raids and covert transfers, you may be asking yourself, what practical lessons can safeguard your own assets and sharpen your financial radar? First, never underestimate the power of transparency and thorough audit trails. Whether you're managing corporate accounts or personal investments, insist on verifiable chain of custody records. Detailed serial number logs, time-stamped handoffs, and dual signature authorizations are your first line of defense against stealthy misdirection. If a transfer seems routine, trace it back to its origin. Just as forensic investigators pored over railway manifests and embassy shipping notes, you too can flag inconsistencies before they become full-blown crises. Second, diversify both your holdings and your counterparty network. In the Soviet case, gold hoarded in a single vault became a single point of catastrophic failure once oversight collapsed. By spreading assets across multiple jurisdictions, with varying institutional safeguards and legal regimes, you create friction that deters opportunistic insiders. Think of it as building multiple checkpoints. Even if one link falters, the others stand guard, slowing down any would-be extractors. Third, cultivate a culture of vigilance and whistleblower support. Those refinery managers and bank auditors who raised alarms in Novosibirsk and Almaty faced intimidation. Yet their testimonies cracked open the truth. In your organization, Promote anonymous reporting channels and protect anyone who raises genuine concerns. A single tip from an honest employee can be the spark that illuminates a much larger scheme. Fourth, leverage technology for real-time monitoring. Modern blockchain-style registries, secure digital ledgers, and AI-driven anomaly detectors can spotlight odd Boolean movements or off-book transactions before they vanish into offshore shadows. Automated alerts triggered by volume spikes or routing changes can give you hours, sometimes days, of extra reaction time, long before a competitor's leverage or a black market broker's network springs into action. Finally, remember that geopolitical shifts can upend even the most secure systems overnight. Stay informed on macroeconomic trends, regulatory changes, and emerging hotspots. When central authorities wobble, as they did in the Soviet collapse, old safeguards crumble first. By aligning your risk management strategies with real-world signals, diplomatic tensions, regime change indicators, or sanction shifts, you'll be better poised to protect your treasure trove, whether it's gold, data, or intellectual property. In the end, the disappearance of 600 tons of Soviet gold is more than a historical footnote. It's a cautionary tale about what happens when oversight unravels and insiders seize the chaos. We've seen how bureaucratic cracks become corridors for contraband, how diplomatic pouches can mask contraband, and how even the most fortified vaults are vulnerable when political structures collapse. Yet this story also highlights a universal truth. Wealth, whether measured in bullion or bytes, demands proactive stewardship. As you reflect on this saga, remember that every transfer, every audit, and every handshake carries risk. By demanding transparency, diversifying assets, empowering whistleblowers, and harnessing modern monitoring tools, you can build defenses that deter would-be exploiters. History shows that in times of upheaval, fences can be breached in hours, but robust systems can keep your treasure safe for decades. If today's journey through frozen rail yards, secret embassies, and clandestine bank auctions sparked your curiosity, hit that like button. Drop a comment below with your toughest question about financial security or past heists you'd like us to investigate next. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell icon, because in the world of money and power, the next big twist is always just around the corner. Join our community of informed investors and history buffs, and never miss a beat in the ongoing quest to uncover the hidden side of finance.